Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the IndieZoNe. My name is Kathy. We first learned about a K-bar sheath from Detective Brett Payne's affidavit of probable cause dated December 29th, 2022. It is an 18-page document. It asked for, and it was successful in receiving, a warrant for Mr. Kohberger's arrest. H2 is where Detective Payne addresses and discusses this K-bar sheath being found on the bed in Madison Mogan's room on the third floor of 1122 King Road. The documentation from the ISP of October 31st, 2022 is the first time that the public not only saw images of this sheath, not from the crime scene, but after it was brought to the lab, state lab in Meridian, as it was done on November 16th, 2022. We have addressed certain issues with the alleged chain of custody, as the Idaho State Police suggests, concerning how this important piece of evidence was transported to the ISP. For example, a document released on October 31st, 2025, alleges that the initial submission of this sheath to the state lab in Meridian occurred agency courier Corporal Tarentine, ISP law enforcement official, dated November 16th, 2022, which is very perplexing to me, is that Chad Williford, also of the ISP, also of law enforcement, the person who picked up the sheath, according to his report, from the Moscow Police Department on November 16th, 2022, in what he describes as brown paper bag, transported it a part of the way from the Moscow Police Department where he obtained that sheath. He says he contacted Corporal Tarentine and that he turned over the sheath to Corporal Tarentine in New Meadows, and that he later found out that Tarentine successfully brought it to the lab. Why Chad Williford's name is not on here, he is an ISP law enforcement official, is a question that remains unanswered. We know that they're speaking of the sheath because of other issues, including that it was Tarentine who is number one on this list. Should be number two, in my opinion. But if we look over to the side here, the ISP notes that there was no evidence tape that was on this package that was dropped off by Tarentine, apparently. No initials. It was secured with what appears to be some strapping tape. It did not have evidence tape on it. And there were no initials on it either. This was done at the ISP. What I wanted to do now is to point out to you for your attention another issue regarding the chain of custody here of the sheath. Looking at notations here, we see on November 21st, 2022, D. Blaker. This appears to be Dustin Blaker, who was a sergeant at the time with the Moscow Police Department. He has since been promoted to captain. His name is listed here as an agency courier, purportedly of this sheath, November 21st, 2022. We see his name further down the list, January 6th, 2023. And a question that I would like to pose is that as you go through these documents, you're going to see Dustin Blaker repeatedly listed as a contact from the Moscow Police Department and not Detective Payne, who was assigned to be the lead detective in this case. I find it curious that matters related to this sheath, this important piece of evidence, he seemed to have little contact with the Idaho State Police, in my opinion. It seemed to come more from Dustin Blaker. And what happened on the 21st is extremely crucial. We learn in this packet that the testing happened on the 17th of November, 5 days after the crimes occurred. That's the date that's listed on all of the photographs of the sheath. And then a key event happened on the 21st. Dustin Blaker did not take possession of that sheath. This is a myth that has been out there, in my opinion, that Dustin Blaker took the sheath, brought it to Texas for Othram to pick up the next part of forensic testing. He did not. He did not pick up the sheath. He picked up, according to his report, documenting the events of the 21st of November, 2022, involving himself. This is report number 93 from the Moscow Police Department. They have also released documents. They've only done it one time. It was back in July, and one of the documents is this report. And it says here, this is Dustin Blaker's report. Although it was written, it appears, January 2023, this had to do with the transportation of DNA profile to Othram, Inc. in Houston, Texas, not the sheath. We see that immediately towards the top of this report, and we're going to learn more as we get into the narrative that it was not the sheath, as the Idaho State Police Laboratory record seems to suggest. If we read the narrative, it says here, on November 21st, 2022, this is a date consistent with what we just saw on the ISP's forensics documentation, November 21st, 2022, I traveled from Moscow, Idaho to Meridian, Idaho to drop off evidence at the Idaho State Police Forensic Laboratory located at, redacted, in Meridian, Idaho. Paragraph 2. After getting evidence checked into the lab, I signed for a DNA profile, which had been generated by the ISP Forensic Lab. This DNA profile was collected from a sheath, which was found by ISP investigators from District 2 during the initial search of 1122 King Road on November 13th. The sheath had been transported to the lab by ISP troopers. So if we could just interject a couple of comments here. Sergeant Blaker appears to confirm that it was not one, but it was more than one ISP troopers who transported the sheath. That would be, as far as we know, 2 people. Williford and Tarentine, as listed on the forensics documentation chain of custody from the ISP. Now, secondly, Sergeant Blaker is saying here that it was the ISP investigators from District 2 who located this sheath during an initial inspection. ISP had been designated to lead the processing of the crime scene under the direction of lead ISP investigator Jeffrey R. Talbot. There has been some confusion as to who found this sheath. Was it Detective Brett Payne or was it the ISP? So questions remain even as to who found this key piece of evidence. That has not yet been clarified. Next paragraph. The DNA profile was stored in a vial, which was then packaged in an evidence envelope by ISP lab technicians and properly sealed with evidence tape. Now, if I could interject here, this appears to be Sergeant Blaker saying that there needed to be evidence tape in order to properly seal a package containing evidence. We've learned from the ISP forensics documentation that when that package left Moscow Police Department, where it had been for 3 days, and we have the background as to how it was that sheath did not go immediately to the ISP lab on the 13th or even the 14th of November. It took until the 16th, and that sheath was given to Detective Brett Payne by Jeffrey R. Talbot, along with all other evidence collected during that first day of processing of the crime scene. It occurred at approximately 12:10 a.m. the morning of Monday, the 14th of November, 2022, as the ISP was shutting down their work for that day. The sheath and other physical evidence was given to Detective Payne. So here we see confirmation that package, in my opinion, coming from Moscow Police Department, going to the Idaho State Lab, as picked up by Chad Williford, and then transported and given to Corporal Turrentine to make the rest of the track from Moscow to Meridian, should have had evidence tape on it. You can read the rest of this report for yourself. It's document number 93 from the documentation that has been released. City of Moscow, special section concerning their investigation into the crimes at 1122 King Road. These are all public records, free for your review. If you have any comments, any thoughts, any opinions regarding this issue of it was not the sheath, it was a profile in a tube that had allegedly been worked up from that sheath by the ISP laboratory representatives, please leave them here. Until next time, this is Kathy. Thank you very much for joining us here today.